Fabulous. We are live. Thank you both for being here.
Of course.
Happy, what are we, Thursday? Happy Thursday, Friday Eve, as they call it.
I just call it Friday, and then I call tomorrow double Friday or extra Friday.
Isn't that like living in the future, though, a little bit?
Always look for that Friday moment.
Nice. That's more
Every day's a
universal.
Friday.
I like that. Cute. Well, good morning or afternoon or middle of the day, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us. We'll give it probably another 30 seconds for people to join the live here as things get up and rolling. I, again, don't have a joke prepared this week, but I know that, I got to follow through on that. I think an opening joke would be a really good idea, but I want to make sure that it's like a topical one. So something cloud-based. That'll be my
Something
goal.
that shifts us all up
Oh, nice.
in spirits.
Stick that branding in there.
Up towards the cloud.
Totally. All right, wonderful. We're going to get started here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. And welcome to this week's episode of Cybersecurity Standup. My name is Bronwyn Hudson. I'm the Uptick social media manager, and I'm your host. Today, I'm joined by Jack Roerig, our technology evangelist, and Sudarshan Kannan. He is our director of product management. Thank you so much for joining, both of you. Really appreciate it. This week, we're going to dive right in. We're talking about cloud detection and response, known by its acronym CDR. I know we all feel like we are constantly swimming in an alphabet soup of acronyms. So this topic is going to allow us not only to talk about some of the intricacies of CDR, but also explore whether or not we need this acronym. Is CDR something that's happening and we're just following it up with the acronym? What are the differences between CDR and XDR? And we're going to get into all of that with our guests today. So Sudarshan, if I can turn it over to you for the first question, can you give us a high-level overview of what is CDR?
Sure. CDR, in my view, is all about how do you detect and respond to threats in the cloud native world, starting with the hyperscalers like AWS, GCP, and Azure, right? So you have three different clouds and you have multiple workloads running on them. You have the infrastructure, which are provided by the cloud providers. And then on top of that, you have the PaaS services. So the infrastructure providers provide IaaS, and then they also build PaaS services on top. And then you overlay SaaS applications, right? So at the end of the day, it's all about how do you make sure we detect for threats in the IaaS infrastructure? How do you detect threats in the PaaS layer? How do you detect threats in the SaaS layer, no matter who the cloud providers are? And eventually trying to respond and remediate those across those cloud providers. That's where I would start the conversation.
Well put.
Jack, do you find that you agree with that? Like, how universal is that definition?
Universal. So that's a very good word to describe my journey over the last week. So when we decided to do CDR as a topic, I was like, oh, CDR, that's a buzzword. That's just CSPM. And then it was so intuitive, and I learned so much by getting the team's opinions. I was like, I can see it being like a necessity, an integral part of a cloud security program. It's one of those things where it's like, why did I think it was so simple? So yeah, CDR has become near and dear to my heart over the past week.
How touching.
I got a blog coming out about it. It's titled like the blog's all about how I learned, but it's titled like I was dumb or something like that. Right? I was how I was being ignorant about CDR for the last 2 years.
I mean, I don't think you're probably alone in that feeling, because as these new acronyms emerge, that's often the question is like, do we need this? Really, what is it? Hasn't it already been covered? So
Yeah.
what I want to dig into really is the difference between CDR and XDR. Does one encompass the other? Which way does that umbrella land? Sudarshan, can you tell
Yeah,
us
so
that?
there are different philosophies, different schools of thought. I don't think there's not a right or wrong answer to that, right? So if you think about XDR, the XDR terminology evolved from EDR, right? EDR is all about endpoint detection and response. And on top of EDR, it was not enough because the threat actors became more sophisticated, right? Now you have to look at beyond endpoints. You have to look at your networking layer. You have to look at your IAM layer. You have to look at your emails, right? So all
Control
this
plane.
coming
Yeah.
together, that's what constitute XDR. So if you think about it, one school of thought is, hey, XDR is covering all areas. Now, if you add cloud to it, it's just an extension of XDR to the cloud. Some people call it a CXDR. I know Jack and I talked about this yesterday, right? So there are different
I
ways.
don't. I think those some people are me and John Morgan and maybe Mark Hill, but that's it.
No, I'm just saying there are different terminology. Industry uses different terminologies, but at the end of the day, it's just that how do you if you extend this XDR concept to the cloud, how do you detect and respond in the cloud? Because cloud is a different beast a little bit because it's all made of APIs. It has about 40,000 APIs across, or maybe even growing every day across all three cloud providers. How do you make sure you detect for those access based or detect for the threats in the cloud based on how customers or threat actors access that APIs and how what they can do once they gain access into that environment? How do you trace the users? How do you detect and how do you respond, if at all, right? So, I mean, the other thought process is that's one school of thought process. The other school of thought process is, hey, cloud native is a completely different beast, right? If you have a container running on a workload in an EC2 machine or a compute engine, now that is a completely different thing, and we cannot apply the XDR to the cloud world. So, I mean, there is no hard and fast rules. At the end of the day, it's all about if you can detect it, awesome. If you can respond to it, that's awesome from a customer angle. I know, Jack, what is your thought based on your conversations?
I 100% agree, but I want to add some more insights into my experience over over the years. So when we say cloud detection and response, typically we were referring to the three major public clouds, right? The cloud could be something we host on prem. It could be part of our on prem, but in this context, it's AWS, Azure, GCP, that kind of lot of things. And if you look at how those companies were developed, they were designed for developers to rapidly prototype and then rapidly scale. So imagine you have an idea and you prototype in AWS, and AWS gives you all these tools, proprietary, or some of them are based on open source, but there's a lot, and there's all these moving parts that are all these different modules that are involved. And then there's a control plane and there are logs. There's a whole bunch of data that doesn't really exist in an on-premise environment necessarily. On-premise environments were generally run more simple because they didn't need to have this tool set available to everyone. So things became much more complicated. We needed, in order to do detection and response in the cloud, we need to track across people accessing S3 buckets, modifying IAM rules. It's not just a matter of monitoring the operating system and the operating system state, of course, and then the operating system, like they're resting in an active state, right? That I think, and I think it's interesting you say EDR involving into XDR because I've thought about that one a lot, Siddharth, and I think you put it really well. Um, it's I was always like, where did XDR come from? What happened to HIDS? Right? What happened to host intrusion detection systems? And it was kind of like a merger of technologies as EDR became not enough because of the sophistication of the increased technology, right? And the even in the data centers, right? Storage arrays becoming more feature rich and more interoperability across data centers in different regions. So this is a CDR is just this necessary thing that evolved out of the increased complexity of the world of hosting websites.
Yeah, no, it's spot on, Jack. Because if you think about it, to your point, those IDS, IPS, the old school, right? That all merged into XDR, right?
Yeah.
UDS, right? So the one thing that I always believe that in the cloud, this is where the differences are, right? The cloud world is a little bit different because when you have containers, how do you? Because majority of the customers when they run on cloud, they run on cloud native. Yes, granted, there are some organizations that run just AMIs and VMs and whatnot. But as the app modernization continues to progress, a lot of organizations are moving to microservices and they have containers, right? The moment you get into container world, it's a completely different thing, especially when it comes to incident response or investigation. You cannot use a traditional XDR tools to really do that incident response and all that in the cloud, right? So you need that understanding of a cloud detection and response to say, okay, if an attacker is compromising an vulnerability on a container that is running in the cloud, that attacker can basically, let's say if he or she breaks into the container and then they can move laterally into the cloud through escalating privileges or whatever the methods are, and then finally exfiltrate the data, you need to follow the user wherever the user goes, starting from your containers all the way to the control plane that Jack you're talking about, and basically complete the whole loop from a detection. That requires a different tool set that you cannot just deal with just XDR alone, right? That is where the industry has to evolve beyond just XDR to really detect and remediate threats in the cloud. Remediation is a different problem. We'll talk about that. But just purely on the detection alone, we need to shift our mindset a little bit beyond just XDR.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a modularizational, like it's like adding a module to XDR. So XDR could do CDR. Like an XDR company could come out and just build that in, and it might not be a modular function. But I think that would be a, kind of anti-pattern design, right? Because we don't want our security software offerings to grow without optionality, right? I don't want to. When I was a CISO very recently, like I didn't want to go and purchase some software that did all this stuff I didn't need, because then people would start using it. Like my team would start deploying these things. They're like, no, this tool's good at XDR. They're not good at this other thing over here, right? So the modularity of it all allowed us to bring certain things in, and it also kind of put some checks and balances in place. So if a company wasn't good at something, right, then we wouldn't buy that portion of that thing. Yeah, it's interesting too to think about with containers related to CDR. Container security, it started off with a bunch of startups that were really interested in container to container breach, right? This idea of breaking through the container boundaries, and it has evolved into so much more. And I think that's when container security is kind of being brought into CDR a bit. Is That's not just the control planes and the orchestration platforms, right? There's more to it than that. Containers have kind of evolved into needing their own kind of XDR, more than just the traditional container security. I mean, gosh, that was only 3 or 4 years ago. But container
Mm.
security, yeah, meaning like container to container breach. It's just
Yeah,
a
I think it's a good point, Jack, because I think you talked about container security, right? I think you touched upon two things. One is the infrastructure layer, the orchestration layer. I mean, I want to touch upon that a little more deeper. I love what you mentioned. If I were to, I would add one other layer, which is the runtime security to the containers part. When you bring orchestration, which is Kubernetes, right? And then you have infrastructure like your IAM logs in the cloud, your network logs, like VPC flow logs in AWS case, if you overlay DNS logs, right? That's the infrastructure, the control plane layer logs. And then you need to bring in the orchestration logs like Kubernetes logs, and then the container runtime logs. All these three together, if you are running in a cloud environment, you need to have a complete visibility into all three different types of logs to really define a CDR, right? Otherwise, you're just missing a piece of the puzzle when you want to do detection in the cloud, right? That's the way that the industry has to think about CDR. Whether an organization call it as XDR in the cloud, or they can say it's a pure CDR, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you need to have three capabilities to solve the problem.
So I'm so curious about. I feel like even in my marketing background, CDR seems to be this contentious topic. It's like not only how are we defining it, but do we need it? Like, but it really sounds like we do. Can you speak to why is this such a contentious topic?
No, because I think it's more about the industry's thought process has to evolve because we are coming from the XDR world, right? When you're coming from an XDR world, a lot of organizations think that, oh, why can't I use XDR in the cloud? But the challenge is you're missing the other piece, which is basically the infrastructure that Jack touched upon. You need the control plane layer log. Otherwise, you're missing the very key piece of detection in the cloud. So then you can ask, hey, now if you add infrastructure logs like IAM logs or the CloudTrail in AWS on top of XDR, isn't that CDR? Maybe. Now then you have to think
yeah.
about, do you want to add let's say DNS logs? Do you want to add VPC flow logs from an AWS angle? Then you keep adding more and more logs to really see what is happening in the environment. We expanded the scope of XDR now, right? That is where it has to evolve. So XDR is not enough in the cloud. You need to go beyond XDR to get to the cloud.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You know, um, it's interesting to me because I watched the breach scene a lot. Is that a thing? The breach scene.
New
I
movie.
checked. It, I mean, if you look, I used to. So I had a research project when COVID hit, where I was assembling breach database information and then using that for executive protection by building up, trying to assemble personas, multiple online personas, and cross-reference them. And one of the things that I noticed based on the analysis of, and I'm not talking about the breach database stuff you get from raid forums or whatever, right? But I'm the maybe on the dark net. I learned how to like read and write Russian better to do this project. So I was getting the full data sets, and these full data sets, it was very clear the breaches that were occurring were happening because of things that traditional XDR wouldn't catch, right? Configuration errors, but more sophisticated than things that CSPMs would catch, right? And throughout this whole research project, working with this data, it made me think more and more about the necessity for bespoke security, depending on the architecture of an application, or go full guns blazing and deploy a platform that gives you the modularity, has the whole thing. I gotta plug my Lord and Savior here, Upticks. But the CDR piece, that's the thing. It never clicked to me until like a couple. Was it last week, Bronwyn, when we started working on this? Yeah, and I'm like CDR. I'm like, that's just another. That's just a CSPM with a couple things added onto it. I'm like, wait, this is that thing I've been thinking about for 3 years or 2 years.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not CSPM because CDR can solve so much of detection problems. I mean, they can address the
Yeah,
detection capabilities. A
it's real
case in
time.
point is another example is right. We talked about CDR. What kind of detections can you do? Right. There are different types of detections. When you talk to detection engineering folks, you talk about anomaly detection. You can talk about pattern-based, behavioral-based detection. Right. A CDR, a true CDR should actually bring all this together and then really elevate the concept of correlation or deterministic way or some statistical way, bring that on the top and try to make it happen from a detection standpoint. That is what,
Econometrics.
yeah,
Econometrics,
yeah,
right? Wouldn't that be cool? Like we had like a bunch of qualifiers and quantifiers and all that we put into an econometrics
yeah.
thing. We all
There
have our jobs.
Yeah, and there are a lot of tools in the industry today where you pull in the logs and all that. Yes, can they do? Maybe. But again, you have to really see can they go and can they detect at scale, number one. Can they do that level of correlation without writing any rules, or can you do it in a more automated fashion based on the patterns that you recognize? Can you bring all that together? That is where we have to go as an industry, right? So if you think about CDR, the industry started with basically simple rules where if you see a single event in your log, just raise a detection, right? That has to evolve. Yes, that's good, but that has to go beyond just a single rules where we say, hey, we found a detection, let's say an IAM action in AWS, right? If you look at IAM action in AWS, that can happen 10 million times within a day. You do not want to do a detection just based on one action, right? That's going to create a lot of false positives. The value of a CDR tool should be where it can take a sequence of events together and then look for patterns within that and say, okay, here there is a real something that you want to investigate, right? That is where the industry has to evolve. And then overlay on top of that some anomalies, right? Bring that all together and increase your signal to noise ratio. That is where the
Yes.
power of CDR comes together.
Thank you from every CISO that I've worked with, like the alert fatigue, the event fatigue. I think it was yesterday, I saw a post by someone on Twitter. I think it was Dr. Anton Chvakin, and it was a survey. Has your SIM generated more noise than your EDR, and your EDR generated more, like false positive, noise fatigue? And the results were like overwhelmingly that EDR generates a bunch of data that's not actionable, and that's true generally, right? Because it requires a lot of configuration. So it's interesting because if you got the behavioral anomaly detection down very well, you could really refine that stuff in granularity so that you're presenting things that are extremely actionable, have like a lot of data behind them that is correlated from multiple sources. It's all stitched together, and might give you a visualization of an attack pattern, that sort of thing. That's what I think CDR is going to evolve into in a more sophisticated way in the very near future.
Absolutely, and spot on to that point, Jack. Right. So You talked about attack path and all that. So it's the industry is moving towards that, where it has become a predictive tool, but I think it has to be more detective as well in nature, right? You can overlay, if there's an attack happen, you have to overlay that and show how the attack actually happened. That would be super helpful for IR specialists and forensics people to see how the actual attack happened through attack surface management or attack path analysis. That would be fantastic. I think,
I've been there.
yeah,
I've been a consumer of it, and like, oh, it is so nice when I can see that attack path analysis or like the risk analysis. Like some platforms might say the security group's open. There's this, RCE vulnerability. There, it's a 3-day vulnerability that exists on a machine over here, and they link it to this another machine that has a high like level of data sensitivity. And I'm just like, what did you just do? Like, making my job so much more pleasant, not
yeah,
easier,
yeah,
right? But more fun, more challenging, right?
yeah.
And I get to focus on the things that matter rather than parsing data.
Yeah, and one thing that they've been, I know all these terms are the industry analysts come up with terms based on the market, where the market is going. So we are hearing a lot of what do you call acronyms like CNAP, CDR, CSPM, CIM, and all that, right? So if you really think a CDR is a component, it's not a separate market, it's a component within the CNAP. Put it that way, right? That's the way that we have to think about. That's where Gartner describes it, right? So
Yeah,
it's all about,
that's
yeah, it's a component
100%.
in CNAP. That's all. Yeah,
We just did a piece on CNAP and CNAP. Wow, Gartner's release on CNAP was something else. It was like really awesome, grandiose. Even like it was this major thing that would be a cultural shift in the way we operate. But yes, CDR would be a necessary component of a CNAP in order to function correctly, in my opinion, and it would be part of something that would be a tool in the back end that would be exposed in a UI that were view based to multiple different roles in the company outside of security, allowing people to consume CDR data without actually knowing it's CDR data.
hmm,
So it's kind of sweet.
Mm,
yeah,
okay, interesting. This fits so well in this like the overarching conversation of why are there so many acronyms and why are there so many more than there used to be? But it sounds like in some cases the acronyms are just a response to things that are already happening in the industry. And this
I don't.
I feel like
It's a
CDR might
culture.
be in this category.
I've been criticized so many times, well, in a tongue-in-cheek way, throughout not just my career but my life, because I use a lot of acronyms. I remember one time I was doing an integration project from an acquisition, and we hired Deloitte. We had these 3 Deloitte consultants. We're probably paying like $1,000 an hour or two. And I joined a meeting 12 to 15 minutes late, and 2 of my team members are kind of like chuckling. And we get to the meeting, and at the end of the meeting, when the Gartner or not Gartner, when the Deloitte folks left, I said, "What's so funny, guys?" And they said, the first 10 minutes of the meeting, these guys were saying, "Can you follow along with anything he says? There's so many acronyms. We're just Googling constantly and taking notes." And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I wish somebody would just tell me so that I would stop, using all these acronyms in like my real life social settings as well.
Totally.
it's acronym soup.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I think, we're doing our best to do events like this where we can not only define it, but just like give a little bit of clarity and explain what these actually stand for in the first place and why that's relevant.
yeah.
I'm just scanning our questions here. Please feel free to keep adding questions. And thank you so much for everyone who's joining our live. We will have more information about this topic super soon. Jack has a blog coming out imminently, and we'd love to dive into this, the intricacies of this topic. So please keep your questions coming. And Sudarshan and Jack, this has been a very educational topic for me, and I really appreciate your time on this one. Are there any concluding thoughts you'd like to share? Anything you wish that people knew about CDR?
Um, I wouldn't say nothing. Just the way I would think about this, if I were running a security operations center or if I'm running a detection and response engineering team in the organization, right? What I would be thinking about is what I'm advocating here. Think about how you want to go beyond XDR, whether the current tool set that organizations have, is it good enough to detect in the cloud? And especially while you're running the containers and modern workloads in the cloud or serverless for that matter, is the tool set enough? Number one. Number two, keep in mind that attackers are become more sophisticated. I'm sure the listeners know that already, but that means we have to evolve our thinking from the old school of XDR into the cloud, because it's all API driven. It's all API driven. The cloud works differently. Does the tool set is enough? Number one. And are you ready to consume the scale of logs that the cloud providers are pushing out? Can you even consume those logs? Number two. Third one is, can you use your existing tool set to correlate and detect all that? If not, then think about CDR. Ask that question to yourself and see if you're ready for from a tool perspective. People and process, of course, that's different. People, of course, you have to train your people. You have to adapt to your process when it comes to remediation, all that. That's different. But from a tool set, think about it and see what is applicable, what is not applicable, and then start educating yourself and your team to take the next step in detecting and preventing threats in the cloud.
Well put. You know, if
Yeah,
you try
great
turning
ways.
your yeah, if you turn your DNS logs up to like the highest verbosity, you're getting quite a few lines per second, per microsecond that are flowing through there. It's hard to consume that data. But I'd say my takeaway is give this acronym a chance. It's actually super important, and I was overlooking it just because I'm cynical. But I do want to make a public apology for the my involvement in CXDR. Um, the company that I was working with, we had great intentions, but I don't know why we didn't capitalize the X. And the acronym would not have been a welcome addition to our community, but I think CDR's got my vote.
All right. Thank you for your public apology.
Sorry to
Maybe
bring that
someday
up.
we'll investigate the lowercase x. Maybe we'll solve that mystery.
I've already we've had a lot of discussion about a post-mortem,
Yeah.
and no one can figure it out.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. And thank you to our audience for joining Cybersecurity Stand Up. And we will see you in cyberspace.
Thank you, Brian.
All right,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jack. Talk to you guys.
Thanks, guys.